Okay, so we're diving into a really interesting topic today. Unmarried couples and the law.
Yeah.
And it's something that I think a lot of people don't really think about until they're in the thick of it.
Right.
Like, you
Yeah.
move in with someone, you're excited, you're not really thinking about
Exactly.
what happens if things go south.
Yeah, and it's becoming more and more common, right?
Oh,
I
absolutely.
mean, just looking at the numbers, we see that over 40% of couples in the U.S. are choosing not to get married.
It's huge.
Yeah. It really makes you wonder if the legal systems in place are really equipped to deal with this kind of shift.
Right. Because so much of it, like historically, revolves around this idea of marriage as the default.
Absolutely.
And if you don't fit into that box, then what?
Right. And it's not just, small thing. This has implications for inheritance,
Mm-hmm.
social safety nets, even things like hospital visitation rights.
Oh, yeah. I hadn't even considered that.
All these things were designed with married couples in mind.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely a challenge to make sure the law is fair for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's almost like the rule book was written for a completely different game.
Exactly.
And now we're trying to play by those rules, even though things have completely changed.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about some of these specific challenges, where those rules just really don't seem to apply anymore. The sources you sent over really zeroed in on three major areas: property division, child custody, and financial obligations.
Right. And these are big ones,
Huge.
especially that first one. Property. I mean, we're talking about everything from who gets the couch to who gets the house.
Right. And then you get into who paid for what?
Exactly. It can get messy really fast.
So for unmarried couples, how is that determined? Like if a couple breaks up, is it just a free-for-all?
Well, it's not quite a free-for-all. In some cases, couples might be considered common law married, which can impact how property is divided.
Wait, common law married?
Yeah.
So you can be accidentally married?
Well, not exactly accidentally. You have to live together and present yourselves as married even without that official ceremony.
Yeah.
But it's definitely possible.
Wow. Didn't know that.
Yeah, and the rules for proving it are different in every state.
Oh boy. Sounds complicated.
It can be.
So common law marriage aside, what other options are there?
Well, in most cases, unmarried couples would have to rely on property division laws, which, again, are different depending on where you live.
So it's like a free-for-all?
Some states use the concept of community property. So anything you get during the relationship is split 50-50.
Okay. That makes sense.
But even then it gets tricky. You have to prove what was acquired together versus what you owned before the relationship.
Ah, so if one person bought the house before they met the other person?
Exactly. Or if one person helped renovate the house even though it's not in their name,
Oh, man.
it can get really complicated really fast. And we haven't even touched on things like intellectual property.
Oh, right. Like if one partner is an artist or a writer or something?
Exactly.
Wow. Okay. This is already making my head spin. And it's not just about physical stuff, Things get even trickier when you bring kids into the picture.
Oh, yeah, that's a whole other level.
Because we're talking about, over 40% of unmarried couples in the U.S. are raising kids together.
Right.
So what happens then when a couple separates? Who gets custody? What about legal rights? It seems like it would get really messy really quickly.
It can be really tricky, especially because without that marriage certificate, establishing things like paternity or custody can be a real uphill battle.
So walk me through it.
Yeah.
What are some of the specific challenges that unmarried couples might face?
Well, one of the biggest things is that in many states, fathers in unmarried relationships don't automatically have the same parental rights as married fathers.
That doesn't seem fair.
Yeah, it can create some real challenges when it comes to getting custody or even just visitation rights.
So for the mothers too, right? I mean, it seems like it cuts both ways.
Exactly. On the one hand, they might have more initial decision-making power.
Because they're the mother.
Right. But it can also make it harder to get child support or hold the father financially responsible. It is. And, it's important to remember that these laws weren't designed to be unfair. They were written at a time when the traditional family structure was the norm.
Right. Makes sense.
So the law is still catching up to the reality of how families are formed today.
So with all these complexities and gray areas, should the law even be involved? Should there be more legal intervention in the lives of unmarried couples? Or is that crossing a line?
It's a tough question. A lot of people feel very strongly on both sides.
So let's play devil's advocate for a minute.
Okay.
What are some of the arguments for greater legal involvement in these relationships?
Well, one of the biggest ones is about fairness and equity.
Mm-hmm.
Without clear legal frameworks, one partner Often the one with less money or resources can be left at a disadvantage.
Especially if things end badly.
Exactly.
Yeah, because it's like, love is great, but lawyers are expensive.
That's right. And without that legal protection, it's easy for things to become imbalanced. And it's not just about the couple either. A lot of people argue that it's about protecting children too.
Right, because they didn't choose this situation.
Exactly. And clear legal guidelines would make sure that their needs are taken care of.
Regardless of whether their parents are married or not.
Exactly.
So how does that work? I mean, are there legal tools available to help unmarried couples navigate these issues?
There are. Things like cohabitation agreements are becoming more and more common.
Oh, right. I've heard of those. It's like a prenup, but for unmarried couples.
Exactly.
So you basically lay down the ground rules from the start.
Right. Things like who owns what, how you'll handle finances, even custody arrangements if you have children.
Smart. Sounds like it could prevent a lot of headaches down the road.
It definitely can. And it's something that more and more couples are considering.
Yeah, it's like that saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Exactly. But,
Yeah.
it's not always that simple. There are definitely valid arguments against greater legal involvement, too.
Right. Because at the end of the day, it is about individual freedom.
Right. Absolutely. Opponents of legal intervention, they argue that couples should have the autonomy to figure things out for themselves.
Yeah, like relationships are built on trust, not contracts.
Exactly. And some people worry that if you involve the law too much, it could actually harm relationships.
Interesting. How so?
Well, some experts say that relying on the law to resolve every little dispute might prevent couples from developing those important conflict resolution skills.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's like going straight to divorce court instead of trying to work things out together first.
Right. And there's also the risk of abuse, you know.
Like one person using the law to their advantage, even if it wasn't intended that way.
Yeah, it's definitely a complex issue with a lot of different angles.
Okay, so we've got these strong arguments on both sides. How do we weigh individual freedom against the need for fairness and protection, especially when kids are involved?
Well, that's where it gets really tricky. And it's why hearing from people who've actually been through these situations is so important.
Right. We've got that interview in the sources with that couple who drafted their own cohabitation agreement.
Oh, right. Yeah, they said it was more awkward than romantic to hash out all those details up front.
But they were really glad they did it.
Absolutely. It gave them peace of mind and ultimately strengthened their relationship.
It's like you're not planning for failure. You're just acknowledging that life can be unpredictable.
Exactly. And having those tough conversations up front can save a lot of heartache later on.
So, big picture, what are some key takeaways for our listeners?
I think the biggest one is that knowledge is power. The more you understand about the legal landscape, the better equipped you'll be to navigate your own relationship.
Whether you're married or not.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to have those difficult conversations with your partner about finances, kids, and what you both want for the future.
It's not about being pessimistic. It's about being proactive.
Exactly. And remember, there's no one-size-fits-all answer.
Every relationship is unique, and what works for one couple might not work for another.
Right. So the important thing is to be informed, make conscious choices, and keep those lines of communication open with your partner.
Well said. This has been a fascinating deep dive into a really important topic.
I agree. We've covered a lot of ground, but there's always more to explore.
Absolutely. So if you're interested in learning more about unmarried couples and the law, we encourage you to check out the sources we've linked in the show notes.
And keep the conversation going. This is something that affects so many people, and it's important to keep talking about it.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.